Hi, my name is Alex Williams, founder of the New Stack, and you are listening to the New Stack Analyst podcast. Each week, we look at application development and management at scale. We'd like to thank SAP as the sponsor for this week's episode of the New Stack Analyst Show. In this episode, we discuss SAP HANA and SAP's investment in the Node.js community. Now let's get to the show. Hi, Alex Williams of the New Stack here for the New Stack Analyst Show. Today we are speaking with Thomas Jung of SAP. Hey, Thomas.
Hello. Thanks for having me on.
You bet. And we're joined by Stephen O'Grady of RedMonk, and the RedMonk crew occasionally comes in as co-host. So, Stephen, thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
Great. And the topic today is about Node.js, and in particular, SAP's use of Node.js on its SAP HANA platform, and generally what SAP has learned from using Node.js, its adoption of Node.js. Plus, we are going to talk with Stephen a bit about the state of Node.js in the enterprise. And so I want to just get started right away. Thomas, tell us a little bit about who you are and what you do at SAP.
Yeah, sure. I work in HANA product management. So we're part of the development group inside of SAP developing HANA. And in product management, we're responsible for what we call roll in and roll out. It's getting information about the product out to customers, partners, whoever's using it, and then taking information back in, improvements, usability, feature requests, and things like that. So basically bringing information in and out of the development organization. And then more specifically, my area of topic of ownership is development tools and languages. So all the things that a developer would use to build applications directly on HANA, whether that's in the database, regular SQL and procedures and triggers and stuff like that, or also more centric to the discussion we're having today, the application server that we have built into HANA as well.
Tell us about that application server.
Yeah, and that's really the history of it is and a good place to begin when we talk about JavaScript. A couple of years ago, when HANA was still quite young, back in the SPS 3 days, so really early on, we saw ourselves writing new applications for HANA, and we were looking at what customers and partners were doing, and they were putting a lot of their logic in the database itself. And we saw an opportunity there to deliver an embedded application server inside the database so that when you're building these applications, if you could put almost all the logic in the database anyway, it kept you from having to go out and find a Java, a .NET, ABAP in our case, sometimes application server to put in front of that. If it was just doing creating RESTful services off the data or hosting, web content or something like that. So we decided to build this lightweight application server into the database itself, and we decided to make that JavaScript based. And now our original implementation that we went with several years ago was Mozilla SpiderMonkey based. But that's what has led us eventually into the Node.js world, as we've done a recent major update to the architecture at the end of last year. We took that existing application server and we've switched from Mozilla SpiderMonkey to Google V8, and we've of course added full Node.js support to that as well. Has some far-reaching effects on the programming model and the infrastructure and all kinds of things, but that's what we can dive into more details on.
Excellent. So you built the database. You built the application server into the database itself. Can you tell us a little bit about that and what that involved?
Yeah, I mean, we didn't want the traditional application server, large scale, stateful, necessarily takes a lot of memory. We wanted something lightweight and pass through that was just there as part of the database. And like I said, could do basic RESTful service enablement and web serving, and not a whole lot else. It's not an area where you write a lot of application logic intentionally designed that way. So we want that in the database itself to take advantage of the parallel processing and in-memory capabilities that HANA has. What we saw is we really started off focused on reducing the cost of ownership of the total application. By having this application server in the database, it meant we were able to do like a zero additional installation to the database itself. When you install the database, every database instance of HANA has this application server already up and running in it, so it's not something extra that an administrator has to turn on or go and configure. When you patch the database, it's automatically patched, so it's basically no extra cost to maintain this because it's really kind of hidden behind the scenes in the database itself. And that was our original main focus, was lowering that cost of ownership. It also means from a development side, it simplifies the development model. You're building an application, you've got one archive to deploy, and it's got the application server artifacts and the database artifacts in it. Simplify, you're not worrying about, am I going to be able to talk to the two, or the port's going to be open or anything like that, because it's so closely aligned. The other thing that we found is it enforces a programming model as well that forces you to do your processing in the database, forces developers to put more of their logic in stored procedures and views, and gets away. I know the industry as a whole in treating their databases have traditionally been a little different than SAP. For years, if you look at like the business suite, we had a tendency to treat the database as a dummy Bitbucket storage medium and do lots of processing at the application server level, bring tons of data back and loop over it and do calculations at the application server level. And one of the nice side effects of this architecture being lightweight and JavaScript based is you can't really do that anymore. Physically you can, but it's not going to perform well. And that keeps that processing in the database in HANA where it performs really well anyway. So it enforces an architectural model that we wanted to pursue anyway.
So Stephen, how does this practice compare to what you're seeing across the industry in the way that SAP has approached this with embedding the application server into the database?
The amazing thing to me about JavaScript generally, and Node specifically, essentially is the versatility. And I think if we zoom out a little bit, from an industry perspective, really what we see, and we've sort of tackled this on a number of occasions through a number of different pieces of research. We see a tremendous amount of essentially fragmentation or diversification of languages and runtimes used and frameworks used, sort of employed in enterprise contexts. 10 years ago, there were one or two, maybe three, sort of different sanctioned, languages, typically something on Java or .NET, and if you built an application, that's how it got built. Today, both those technologies are still around. They're still quite popular. They're still used in a wide variety of contexts. But we see it sort of used alongside of them, a tremendous amount of sort of different technologies, different runtimes, different languages. So we see this huge explosion and flowering, if you will, of different languages employed, and really what we see used is essentially different tools for different jobs. Essentially, trying to take advantage of the relative strengths and weaknesses of a given platform. And certainly in SAP's case, it's very consistent, with what we see from other enterprises and sort of other vendors, using JavaScript and Node. Essentially, sort of embracing, the lightweight nature, the versatility of the platform, its embed-ability. It's essentially a platform that solves a very specific set of needs very neatly. So yeah, I think in broad strokes, I think it's quite consistent with what we see.
Todd, you have, adopted, in this process, obviously adopted Node.js. Tell us about that adoption process. You did have to teach Node internally, as I recall you saying before. I'm just curious on who you decided to, to teach, Node, and why you made that decision as you did.
We had people that knew JavaScript. A lot of people know it from client-side UI. Our client UI technology is heavily JavaScript based. And then, of course, in the application server area, we had this growing number of people that knew JavaScript from the original Mozilla SpiderMonkey implementation that we used inside of HANA. But that was a bit different. Going from Mozilla SpiderMonkey to Node.js, going from a totally synchronous programming model to having to learn the delicacies of Node and its evented I/O and the pros and cons of that, plus the opening up of the platform, because now all of a sudden we have access to all these open source Node modules, and which ones should we use and which ones should we not use and how best to use them. These are the main things that we had to upskill people on, our own developers. And for the most part, we didn't have to teach people JavaScript itself, but that we did some trainings on focusing on the deltas between what you probably know of JavaScript today and the specifics of Node.js. And we focused pretty heavily on the whole idea of callbacks and evented I/O. We also decided to use some of the standard modules ourselves in our core foundation, Express and async and a few of the most popular ones, but then to also redistribute those as part of the product. So that meant really, learning those inside and out and doing a lot of evaluation of which ones are the best to choose there, and then how best to structure the rest of our programming model around that, because we were developing our own reusable Node modules specific to interaction with HANA or other SAP enterprise functionality. And we wanted, for instance, those to play nice with some of the open source modules. We wanted, for instance, we expose our database connection module as a Express middleware. So it's really easy to use in a standard Express-based application. And then we also have a compatibility mode that we wrote, basically using Node fibers behind the scenes, that allows us to take the old scripts that we had that were Mozilla SpiderMonkey based, that ran synchronous, and run them in the Node world without any programming changes, to help customers and ourselves bridge the transition between the two. And we've actually found that to be quite attractive from a programming model. We've decided to keep it, not just for backwards compatibility, but also new development as well, because we find that you don't always need that more complicated programming model of the asynchronous non-blocking, all the embedded callbacks and things. Sometimes a simpler synchronous programming model is actually preferable, and we have the ability to move back and forth between those two now.
Stephen, do you have any questions?
Well, I guess the thing I'm most curious about, I guess, is the sort of reception from customers, right? In the sense that as I just mentioned, sort of on a developer basis, the sort of popularity of JavaScript and popularity of Node are really, for us, really unquestioned. In other words, literally every quantitative metric that we can point to says basically the same thing. That both are very, very popular, in their particular context. Within enterprises, of course, we've seen substantial uptake, and we've seen commercial opportunities sort of spring up, to take advantage of that sort of enterprise interest and so on. But you still do find, within a lot of enterprises, some reluctance, with things that are different, some conservatism, when it comes to sort of the embrace of technologies that haven't been around for a couple decades. So yeah, from the SAP standpoint, I guess I'm just curious, what have the experiences been, in terms of, going out and talking to customers about, really a different technology and a different way of doing things?
Yeah, there's two experiences that I've had. One is I'm kind of surprised by, particularly in larger enterprises how many developers have kind of already embraced Node, sometimes off to the side, and you find, oh yeah, we've been using Node over in this other non-SAP project, and we really like it, and we think it's great that now we're going to be able to use it in the SAP world. So, surprising amount of adoption already out there, usually outside of the SAP ecosystem inside customers. The other aspect was, of course, you hit people that are maybe aware of it, but would have never considered it. But it's sort of one of those things that once SAP does it and SAP supports it, and they know they can come to SAP for that first level support, and it's rolled into the product. Now you have developers that would have never considered it before saying, okay, yeah, if SAP's rolling it out, then we'll look at it probably for the first time. And people that would have never went out and done Node development on their own will certainly take an interest in it. And I guess that's the other thing that we have to do. I mean, we're shipping a pretty a standard version of Node, but there's a difference there. It's to me, that's the difference between, say, enterprise, what we ship and fully support, and just telling a customer to go get Node off of the Node.js org website and run it on their own. We have a product installer built around it. We have a framework, a controller framework that monitors instances of the Node engine, scales it up, scales it down, that runs it isolated per service, and all these supportability features. Built-in debugger, a web browser-based interactive debugger, and things like that. And that's always, customers tell us, oh, we want, leverage more open source, but at the same time, they expect us to build that enterprise level of supportability and convenience features around it. And it's never as easy as just taking something off the shelf and just saying, oh yeah, we're going to redistribute it. That was a intensive year's worth of development that went into taking standard Node and just sort of preparing it for the enterprise.
Can you give us some examples of some of, of what complexities that brought and how you solved them?
Yeah, well, there's several, but probably the biggest and one of the more interesting ones, I think, is Node's reliance on NPN to load modules. It's a great, powerful feature of Node, the ease at which you can reuse modules and manage the dependencies between them. What would be very complex dependency trees becomes a very simple process to reference a Node module that maybe references internally, 10, 12 other modules projects. But the main problem we hit was we, of course, have customers that run the HANA system completely firewalled, isolated. They would never let it touch the internet. So right away, we had to come up with something that would still allow us the power of NPN and frankly the dependence that any Node development has on NPN, but with no internet connection and without the complexity of having to tell the customers, fire up their own internal NPN repository. So we actually ended up having to build our own little lightweight NPN repository into every HANA system. It runs more as like a local cache than a full repository. But from our development tools, when you reference Node modules, whether they're SAP delivered ones or some of the more popular open source ones that we've scanned and improved and then redistribute, you don't have to go out to the internet to get those. They'll come from that local cache. It also allows us to distribute sort of approved versions of the Node modules. A new version comes out and we'll test it, we'll do the code scans on it, and then we'll ship it with the next revision of support package of the product, and then the customer knows that those revisions that go along with it, or those versions of the Node modules that go along with it, are the ones that are safe to use, have been tested with our products and scanned overall. So that was the other thing we had to do. We can never just set the customer free in the wild west of open source reusable modules. As powerful and nice as those are, our customers expect us to provide that level of guidance and support around even redistributed open modules.
Stephen, that is that an interesting use case? Is this a very unique use case that you see Or is this similar to other use cases you're seeing where there's a lot of customization going on?
I would agree with the statement that, particularly when in the Node world, there isn't, it's not that there's no off-the-shelf, essentially components available, but a lot of the work is going to be sort of custom. A lot of the work is going to be, essentially tweaked, refined, optimized, for particular use cases, for particular scenarios. So, yeah, I don't think I think that's, at least in my experience, that's certainly more the norm. Now, that being said, one of the strengths of Node, of course, sort of as we've touched on, essentially is the library, support, so npm and everything that goes into the packages that are available for the runtime. It's a very, very extensive community of lots and lots of different choices available to you. It's just, like I said, when you get into specific solutions, they'll help, do a lot of the heavy lifting, but there's always that sort of last mile, that you're going to need to customize yourself.
So I'm curious on, on how that has affected, SAP's involvement with third-party developers who you want to, help build out applications. It does really require all these pieces then for them to, to work with you in developing those third-party applications.
Well, we try to package it all up, like the NPM repository, and we don't quite have it yet, but we're going to redistribute Git and Garrett directly with the HANA database as well. We want to get to the point where we're using lots of open components, and if you already have them in your enterprise, a lot of customers already have Git. They don't need us to give them another Git server. That's fine. We'll continue just to connect up by default to your existing one. But we want an ease of entry as well, and for the customer that wants maybe the small scale single developer or small startup, they want the one-click installation and then have all the parts and pieces, not have to go chase them all down. We want to provide that as well, from the standpoint of having the local NPM cache to, in the near future, redistributing Git and Garrett along with the HANA database. The web tooling, of course, we're open, go use Sublime or any number of popular open tools and connect to HANA. All the development APIs are exposed to the command line and a REST interface, but we're also building an all-in-one web IDE as well that runs in a web browser that lets you do all the development there. So we're trying to cater to both. The person who wants to roll all their own and combine it with other components that they have, and the person who wants the ready out of the box to go experience.
Now let's take a quick break before we get back to the second half of the show. SAP is the sponsor for this week's episode of the new Stack Analysts. SAP is committed to Cloud Foundry, an industry-leading open platform as a service for SAP HANA Cloud Platform. You can learn more about SAP HANA Cloud Platform, SAP's commitment to Cloud Foundry, all at sap.com. Now let's get back to the show. What are you finding with the customers? Are you needing to evangelize Node, or are they adopting Node already? I'm curious about the mix.
We're not having to do a whole lot of evangelization of Node, and maybe that's partially because our customers, that if they want to work on the HANA platform, they're not left with a lot of choices. I mean, we have choices. If you want to use what's there, we support Apache Java and Node.js. But a lot of people, not that they don't have choice, but the default option that we present to them is Node.js now, and a lot of customers are just going to tend to say, okay, well, that's what SAP is telling me to use when I do HANA standalone development. That's what I'm going to use, or they're receptive enough to say, well, okay, I'll go check it out if that's what SAP is suggesting now. But I think it also goes back to, we've gotten such a warm reception to Node, even in our enterprise customer base. People seem to have just a very positive impression of it, and I very rarely have to convince somebody to go look at it. The response is almost always the opposite. I start talking about it and people go, "Oh, that's great that you guys are finally doing Node. I'm really looking forward to using it." That's been the majority response.
So, Stephen, it seems like Node, the use of Node.js inside the enterprise has passed that evangelist stage, so to speak, or not so much. Where is the Node.js movement? From what you guys can tell from the analysis you've done of the market.
I would say it's definitely past the evangelism stage. So basically, to me, the evangelism stage, for example, would be when people are coming to an SAP, in this case, and saying, "Hey, this is interesting. You should pay attention." And developers are trying to sort of get SAP interested and so on. Once organizations like an SAP are sort of investing in the technology, to me that's a good sign, right? That it's sort of passed beyond the, hey, this is a sort of neat fad, because for very good reasons, large vendors, tend to be, somewhat slower to adopt, because the last thing in the world they want to be doing is coming out to their customers with some new solution every day, because enterprises just don't move that quickly, and it just indicates sort of a lack of, it basically negatively impacts your credibility. In other words, if you tell me a technology is good today, and then tomorrow you're telling me that you have a new technology, and the technology you were selling me yesterday isn't that great anymore, then it's not gonna do wonders for your reputation. So yeah, I think in terms of a market sense, I think we're well beyond the hey, this is sort of a a trial balloon, but we're still sort of well out from the essentially we have sort of canned sort of off-the-shelf solutions, caught solutions for basically say 80% of the problems or 75% of the problems, whatever the number is, that you're likely to run into. In the sense that as we talked about, there are packages available for tons and tons of the base level functions, and you have some interesting frameworks and so on, like Express, to build on top of. But by and large, a lot of the work is still being done. A lot of the work is still all right. I need to put these things together in some interesting new way, and deliver them sort of in an interest, to build some interesting new technology. And a lot of the work is still, as we talked about, custom. So in other words, I think we're over the hump in terms of hey, is this a real thing? But we're still sort of a ways out from hey, this is sort of entrenched, and it's everywhere. It's well, not necessarily that it's everywhere, but it's everywhere, and there's a solution for everything. Very much as folks would sort of point to, for Java, you're going to find Java applications that are for just about every last problem the enterprise is going to have, and Node and JavaScript are a little ways out from that yet.
So Thomas, what is the work that you still need to do? What's on your to-do list as far as Node.js goes?
Yeah, well, we have a pretty good technical foundation for how we scale it and we install it and things like that. We feel like we're in pretty good shape there. We obviously have the continued item of keeping up with Node. We have a pretty aggressive schedule that we don't want to fall behind releases. We have a major release of HANA twice a year, and at each of those we want to keep up with the latest Node versions. We're already using Node 4X internally and ready to roll that out, and then planning for the release later this year to move up to 5. So there's a lot of work keeping up because there's a fast-moving foundation to the runtime. The other area where we're really focused is a lot of investment on the tooling and framework side. Framework, we want to build more framework pieces, more reusable Node modules, more of them that tie into some of the popular ones. We really focused on Express and tying the database connectivity into Express, and now we're looking at what can we do with WebSockets. Should we choose like a main WebSocket module to focus on and roll into our products, and how to use that? So there's a couple areas like that. How to maybe build a reusable IoT kind of framework there. So we want a few more of those out of the box and delivered by SAP. And then and the development tooling. I mentioned that we're shipping a web-based development tool. We want to automate more of the things, make development more comfortable. we want to do some cute tricks behind the scenes so that maybe debugging is easier, so that you don't have to restart the Node service to debug it, or it's a very fast restart. Test deploying, we're building a unit test framework for Node, and things like that are almost like convenience features, but expected in the enterprise. And a lot of that is, we're not building them all from scratch ourselves, but it's kind of like what was just described. We had to pull various pieces together and then fill in the last mile to make it all work together in our environment.
Steve, any questions or thoughts about this work that SAP is doing?
Well, I guess I'm always curious from a resource perspective, right? We touched on this earlier. How would you say sort of the process is going overall? Sort of internally in terms of spinning up the familiarity, sort of getting everybody on board, everybody pulling in the same direction, because that can obviously be a challenge.
It helped internally early on that we had really great support from the top levels of the organization. Basically set out a vision that we're going to make this transition and do it relatively aggressively from a timeline standpoint, to have basically built out a whole new application server architecture, based upon Cloud Foundry with Node.js and Apache Java support inside of it in about a year's time is a pretty big effort. And now we face the effort, now that we've delivered the foundation and the tooling, is that we have to convert applications. And that's a bigger effort. And there's many developers to upskill and get working on that. It helps them, once again, that management has made internally inside SAP, has made a pretty strong mandate that, yes, we will switch everything over, to this new environment in a relatively short time frame. Once again, there we're trying to help out by delivering, anywhere we can, backwards compatibility, the emulation of the old JavaScript runtime inside of Node.js, built-in OData services in the new runtime, and migration tools. We haven't delivered them to customers yet. We're testing them internally, but automated tools that will scan your old projects and convert them to run inside of Node, and convert them. There's moving to Node was also meant we made changes to our security model and the way we do authentication, and there's other technical changes there than just moving from one JavaScript type to another. But we're trying to automate a lot of that, with these migration tools. They'll never be push button 100% migration. There's too many conceptual differences between the two worlds. But if we can get that to 80, 90%, and then that really, the less boring work of moving between platforms that we can automate, the more receptive the developer's going to be to making that move.
Now, as I understand, SAP has started investing in in container technologies, and starting to think through how to use containers in the context of SAP HANA. I'm curious on how that fits with the Node.js story.
Well, all the new Node.js stuff that I've described here runs in the container architecture. Because that's the other thing that we've done here, is we've moved from sort of a monolithic application server where every JavaScript service runs in just a pool of runtimes to containerized at the service level. The container technology that we're using is Cloud Foundry. Our on-premise HANA systems, we've done our own implementation of the Cloud Foundry APIs because we really only needed a subset of the functionality and a subset of the isolation. We didn't necessarily need file system or OS level isolation on-premise, but we still wanted the other advantages that we get there, the service level isolation of containerization. So that's how we're able to easily support multiple runtimes. The two main ones that I've mentioned, Node.js and Apache Java. We're also going to soon open up support for bring your own language, bring your own runtime on HANA. So anything that has a Cloud Foundry build pack will be able to run in the application server on HANA. But the support model, SAP will only support the runtime. We support the startup, the build pack correctly, but then everything that goes on inside of it is your own responsibility outside of the two main ones that we support. So that's been a pretty big shift for us, opening up the idea of bring your own language, bring your own runtime directly on the HANA application server. in the past, that would have been a pretty foreign concept, and now we're ready to offer that because of this containerization. And of course, the scale, how it affects scaling, and we can now scale individual services, multiple instances across multiple servers, and you don't really have to program that, say, into your Node or your Java. We'll handle that at the controller infrastructure, the Cloud Foundry infrastructure, and scale instances automatically for you. So there's some really good scale benefits that, of course, we always hit in the enterprise world, and with new use cases like IoT and things like that we had to have new answers to how to do that, and the containerization has been the answer to that.
So this is to fit very well with your Cloud Foundry, strategy, hasn't it?
Yeah, I mean, what's interesting is, in the cloud, on the HANA Cloud Platform, they're moving to be directly Cloud Foundry based, and then on premise we have this subset, our own implementation of the Cloud Foundry APIs. But in the end, what that means is customer can build the application once and then deploy it to either of those. Same archive format, the same configuration files, and basically the same concepts of build packs and reusable services. Maybe implemented differently in the two environments, the individual services or the individual build packs, but your application consuming them is the same for both those environments. So we see this heavy use of hybrid. Our customers want to develop the application once and run it without changing it, both on-premise or in the cloud, or maybe both at the same time for different sets of endpoints, different sets of consumers. And I think what we've done here is put an architecture in place that really supports that.
Stephen, this seems like a pattern, doesn't it, where we're seeing the adoption of Node.js, which has been happening for a number of years, but now we're seeing this Node.js container story start to unfold. Are you seeing that?
Well, I mean, I guess what we're seeing sort of more broadly, sort of as I touched on earlier, essentially is a fragmentation, right? Sort of different tools for different jobs, realization, where enterprises are saying for the first time in a long time that, look, we don't have to restrict ourselves to a single tool or a single language or a single database or whatever. We have sort of a variety of tools at our disposal, and we can use the best fit at any given time. And a lot of times it's going to be traditional technologies like a Java. In many other cases, it's going to be something like a Node. So I think we see that, and sort of by extension, there's sort of an increasing awareness that containers offer a lot of advantages. It's one of the fastest growing, Docker specifically is one of the fastest growing container technologies we've seen at RedMonk. And, to the extent that, something like a Cloud Foundry, offers you a sort of, interesting and capable set of services around, sort of manipulating, managing, et cetera, containers, it makes perfect sense, in terms of the adoption. So, yes, I think it's a pattern to the extent that you do see these things used in conjunction very frequently with one another. But really from my standpoint, they're just sort of consequences of the natural, sort of the larger underlying pattern, which is we're going to use sort of the best tool for the job.
Mm-hmm. So Tom, just in conclusion, any thoughts about where you guys are going with in your participation in the Node.js community, SAP HANA, the use of containers, microservices? Any thoughts about your direction over the next few months?
Yeah, I mean, we're just getting started with all those things. It's sort of a big new world for us, both from the containerization standpoint and part of the larger Node.js community. Probably, one of the things we want to do there is we want to start looking at how we can take some of the things that we've built, some of our modules or the wrappers, the frameworks that pull together several popular open source modules, and how we can contribute those back to the community so that they don't remain SAP specific. I mean, there's some that will probably always be SAP specific, but then there's some that just extend the overall platform, and it would be good to contribute them back, but then also get input and things from the community into those. So we've been kind of isolated by necessity this first year as we've developed internally before we released it, and we've been consuming things from the community, but until things are finished, we couldn't contribute back. Now we want to come up with a good model where we can do that. So that's probably the biggest thing in that area that we want to tackle the rest of this year.
Great. Well, Stephen, any last thoughts from your side, from the industry perspective here?
No, I mean, I think, really what I would just say is that, I think the trajectory of Node and the trajectory of JavaScript, I think from our end are pretty clear. They're both headed in sort of in an upward direction. I think we're going to see a lot more of that. So enterprises, particularly in this case, SAP customers, I think are likely going to be using a lot more of it. And the interesting thing is that I think, like a lot of technologies, all the time with cloud, as one example, you can go out and talk to enterprises, frequently and say, hey, are you using any of this? And they'll come back and say, no, all of our applications are written in Java and so on. And, you actually go out and talk to the practitioners, the folks writing applications, and they're like, oh yeah, no, we use that a lot. Because there's always this delta between, sort of what, sort of upper management thinks is being used and what is actually being used on the ground. And,
Right.
So I think from the standpoint of JavaScript and Node, I think, as I said, they're headed up, from everything that we can tell.
Well, Thomas, thank you very much for joining us to talk about SAP HANA and Node.js and what you are doing with Cloud Foundry and the use of containers. And Stephen, thank you for joining us to provide that industry perspective. And we look forward to speaking with both of you guys soon.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Yeah, cheers.
That's it for this week's show. Thank you very much for joining us. I'd like to thank our sponsor. SAP is the sponsor for this week's episode of the new Stack Analysts. SAP is committed to Cloud Foundry, an industry-leading open platform as a service for SAP HANA Cloud Platform. You can learn more about SAP HANA Cloud Platform, SAP's commitment to Cloud Foundry, all at sap.com. Audio editing and sound design for the new Stack Analyst podcast is provided by Broken Hours. You can find them at brokenhours.com. Thanks again, and hope to see you back at the show. Bye-bye.